Ryan Holloway hated being late, not because he feared consequences, but because lateness always felt like a crack in the fragile order he worked so hard to maintain. As a single father, every minute mattered. Mornings were rushed, evenings drained, and anything unplanned demanded more energy than he usually had left. Standing on the crowded evening train platform, he adjusted the strap of his worn backpack while keeping a careful eye on his 9-year-old son, Lucas, who leaned against the railing, fighting exhaustion with quiet patience. The platform was thick with noise and movement, a blur of commuters checking phones, shifting weight, and staring past one another. Ryan noticed how everyone seemed wrapped in their own invisible bubble, guarding it closely. He understood that instinct. After his wife passed, public spaces had started to feel heavier, less forgiving. He had learned to move efficiently, to avoid friction, to take up as little emotional space as possible. Survival wasn't dramatic. It was repetitive, quiet, and often lonely. When the train finally arrived, the doors slid open and the crowd surged forward without hesitation. Seats disappeared instantly, claimed by reflex more than intention. Ryan guided Lucas inside, placing him carefully near a metal pole where he could hold on safely. He positioned himself protectively, one arm steadying his son as the train jolted into motion. This was familiar territory, standing rides, sore legs, long silences broken only by station announcements and tired sighs. Lucas rested his head briefly against Ryan's side, his small frame heavy with the weight of a long school day. Ryan felt the familiar pull between patience and fatigue. He wanted to offer comfort, but he also knew that this was part of their shared reality. Not everything could be softened. Some things were simply endured together. He scanned the car automatically, noting exits, empty spaces, anything that could make the ride easier for his son. Around them, no one spoke. People avoided eye contact with practiced precision, their expressions neutral, distant. Ryan noticed how quickly discomfort spread in crowded spaces, how everyone pretended not to see each other, as if acknowledgement itself demanded something they weren't willing to give. He felt himself slipping into that same mode, retreating inward, preparing to disappear into the rhythm of the ride. He didn't know yet that this routine moment was about to fracture, that something small, almost invisible, would interrupt the careful balance he relied on. For now, he stood quietly, one hand gripping the pole, the other resting protectively near Lucas. Another ordinary ride home, he thought, another evening survived. He had no idea that a simple question, asked moments later, would challenge everything he believed about noticing others and being noticed in return. The train slowed at the next station, doors sliding open with a tired metallic sigh. A woman stepped inside carefully, timing her movement between the rush of bodies. Her name was Maya Collins. She was 26, attractive in a quiet, confident way, with refined features and a calm presence that suggested discipline rather than fragility. Her hair was neatly styled, her posture deliberate. The prosthetic arm, partially visible beneath her tailored jacket, did not define her, but it shaped how she moved through the world. Maya paused just inside the door, letting the crowd settle before taking another step. She scanned the packed car with practiced precision, measuring distance, stability, and the rhythm of the train. Standing for long periods strained her shoulder and lower back, a dull ache she had learned to manage silently. What bothered her more was the moment before asking for help, the calculation, the exposure, the possibility of rejection that lingered longer than any physical discomfort. She felt the eyes before she saw them. Some people glanced briefly, curiosity flickering before retreating. Others looked away too quickly, uncomfortable with noticing anything that challenged their routine. Maya had learned not to take it personally, though some days it was harder than others. Today had already taken more from her than she expected. Work meetings, forced composure, the quiet exhaustion of proving, Again, that she was capable. She adjusted the strap of her bag with her natural hand, grounding herself. Asking for a seat shouldn't feel like a negotiation with dignity, yet it often did. She reminded herself that needing something didn't erase her independence. That strength wasn't measured by how much pain she tolerated in silence. Still, her chest tightened slightly as she searched for a place to stand where the movement of the train wouldn't throw her off balance. Her gaze landed briefly on a father and son standing near the center of the car. The man looked tired but alert, his body angled protectively toward the child. There was something steady about him, something unforced. Maya noticed how his attention remained outward rather than buried in a phone. She hesitated, considering her options, weighing discomfort against the vulnerability of asking a stranger for space. The train lurched forward again, the sudden motion sending a sharp reminder through her shoulder. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about listening to her body instead of punishing it. She had promised herself she would stop doing that. Her fingers curled slightly as she made a decision, her heartbeat steady but deliberate. As she took a step closer, she caught her reflection in the darkened window. Composed, capable, attractive, and far stronger than the assumptions people made at a glance. The scarred memories of the accident flickered briefly in her mind, then faded. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece. This was not weakness, this was navigation. She approached the man calmly, her voice already forming in her mind before she spoke. She didn't know his name, his story, or how he would respond. All she knew was that this moment mattered more than it seemed. The train roared beneath them, the city rushing past unseen, as she prepared to ask a question so simple it carried the weight of everything she had learned about surviving in plain sight. Her voice came out steady, controlled, almost neutral when she finally spoke. "Is this seat taken?" She gestured toward the empty space beside Ryan, a space that wasn't officially claimed, yet somehow felt protected by invisible boundaries. The words themselves were simple, polite, impossible to misinterpret. Still, the air around them tightened. It wasn't the question that carried weight, but the courage it took to ask it in a room full of strangers trained not to respond. Ryan looked up slowly, his attention shifting fully to her. What surprised him wasn't the prosthetic arm. He noticed it only after registering something else first. Effort. The deliberate calm in her posture, the restraint in her tone. He recognized it instantly, the same controlled composure he wore himself every day, the kind that comes from learning, the hard way, that asking costs more than enduring. For a brief moment, the noise of the train seemed to fall away, the clatter of wheels, the low hum of conversation, the automated announcements all blurred into the background. Ryan felt the subtle pressure of being watched, sensed the unspoken curiosity of nearby passengers. He was aware of the choice forming in front of him, small on the surface, heavier underneath. He didn't rush it. He never did anymore. Lucas followed his father's gaze, his expression open and curious. He took in the woman standing before them without judgment, without the filters adults learn too early. To him, she was simply someone asking a question. Ryan noticed that too. He noticed how his son waited, trusting that whatever came next would make sense. That trust mattered more than the eyes around them. Maya held her breath without realizing it. She had asked the question, and now came the waiting, the longest part. She kept her expression neutral, prepared for a polite refusal, or worse, an awkward silence disguised as consideration. She had experienced both enough times to predict the rhythm. Ask, pause, absorb disappointment quietly, move on without letting it show. Ryan's silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional. He glanced briefly at Lucas, then back at Maya, as if reassessing the situation from a different angle. It wasn't about ownership of a seat. It was about space, about who was allowed to take up room witut apology. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest, a familiar instinct stirring. Protective, grounded, decisive. Around them, people pretended not to listen while listening closely. A few shifted their weight, already preparing to disengage from whatever discomfort might follow. These were the moments public spaces revealed their quiet rules. Don't get involved. Don't complicate things. Keep moving. Ryan had lived by those rules for a long time. He understood why people followed them. He also knew when to break them. The question hung between them, unresolved, suspended in the rhythm of the moving train. Maya met Ryan's eyes briefly, not pleading, not defensive, just present. Whatever his answer would be, she was ready to accept it. She had already done the hardest part, and Ryan, standing there with his son beside him, felt the weight of that realization settle in. Ryan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his son, his fingers resting briefly on Lucas's shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. He asked Lucas in a low voice if he was okay standing for a little longer. Lucas, already leaning slightly against his father, nodded without hesitation. There was no resistance in him, no desire for comfort over the inconvenience of standing. His trust was simple, unspoken, but absolute. Ryan's heart shifted slightly at the sight of that unquestioning trust. It was a reminder of the life they shared, a life built on mutual respect and understanding. Ryan turned back to Maya, now fully aware of the weight of the moment. The decision was simple, but it felt significant. He wasn't going to make her feel uncomfortable, nor was he going to treat her any differently from anyone else. The world had a habit of seeing her arm before it saw her, but Ryan wasn't about to do that. He wasn't about to make her feel like she was asking for something more than just a place to sit. So he spoke calmly, with certainty. "The seat isn't just free," he said, meeting her gaze. "You can take both mine and Lucas's if you need to." There was no hesitation in his words, no effort to sound accommodating or sympathetic. It wasn't a performance, nor was it an act of charity. It was simply a fact. The seat was available, and if she needed it, it was hers, just like anyone else's seat. The simplicity of the offer hung in the air between them. Maya's breath caught in her throat, though she didn't show it. She had heard those kinds of offers before, but never quite like this. It wasn't filled with guilt or overcompensation. It was just normal. Maya hesitated for a brief second, trying to process the unexpected ease in his words. The offer wasn't tinged with pity, which she had come to expect in these situations. It wasn't a favor from someone who thought they were doing something special. It was just an offer, plain and simple, without any heavy undercurrent. The steadiness of his voice, his lack of hesitation, and the absence of judgment in his eyes made her momentarily forget the tension she had been carrying with her all day. The train lurched slightly, and the movement jolted her from her thoughts. She looked at the seat beside him. Ryan was still standing, one hand loosely gripping the pole, his other resting on his son's shoulder. He wasn't trying to draw attention to himself or to the fact that he was offering something beyond what was expected. He was just there. A father, a man, a stranger showing simple kindness. In that brief moment, Maya realized that he wasn't treating her differently than anyone else. He was treating her like a person. Maya's instinct was to refuse, to say that she was fine standing, to not impose herself. But something in Ryan's tone, his calm decisiveness, made her rethink. She hadn't expected someone to treat her with such quiet normalcy. Her mind raced, caught between gratitude and uncertainty. The last thing she wanted was to be seen as a burden. But here was a man offering something as ordinary as a seat, without any performance or emotional strings attached. With a soft exhale, Maya finally took a step forward. "Thank you," she said, her voice steadier now. There was no need for more words. She understood what had been offered, and she accepted it with the grace it deserved. She sat down, grateful but still processing the simplicity of what had just happened. As the train continued to rumble along, she felt a quiet shift inside herself, a subtle release of tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding on to. Ryan remained standing, his gaze briefly meeting hers once more. There was a brief exchange, not of words, but of understanding. He didn't need to say more. The offer had already been made. He had treated her like any other person who needed a seat, and in doing so, he had reminded Maya that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can carry the most weight. Maya lowered herself into the seat with deliberate care, her movements fluid despite the weight of the prosthetic arm she had become so accustomed to. She gave a quiet thank you to both Ryan and Lucas, not out of obligation, but out of genuine gratitude. The moment felt different, in a way she hadn't anticipated. The offer hadn't been a formality or a favor, it had been simply that, a gesture. As the train began to move, she adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder with practiced efficiency, the familiar action grounding her. There was a comfort in the simplicity of it all, in the absence of pity or sympathy. Ryan stood by the pole, his hands gripping it with casual ease. His posture was relaxed, almost effortless, as if standing for long stretches was second nature. Lucas leaned lightly against his father, his tired eyes drifting shut as the rhythmic motion of the train lulled him into a peaceful silence. Maya's gaze briefly flicked to the pair. The way Ryan held himself, the protective, patient way he stood, spoke volumes about his quiet strength. It wasn't something you could put into words, but it was there, steady and unobtrusive, much like the calm energy that had guided the interaction. Maya realized that the exchange hadn't been awkward. There had been no uncomfortable pauses, no overcompensating gestures, no undercurrent of hesitation. It had just flowed naturally, like something two people who didn't need to prove anything to each other could do with ease. For someone who often felt like an outsider, the ease of the moment stood in sharp contrast to the tension that usually accompanied public interactions. Ryan's casual offer had been devoid of unnecessary drama, and that made all the difference. As the train rattled along the tracks, Maya spoke softly, explaining that standing for long periods caused strain on her back and shoulder after a full day at work. It wasn't a complaint, just a quiet statement of fact. She didn't delve into the specifics of why. She didn't need to. There was no room for the weight of the accident in this conversation. Ryan didn't ask for details, nor did he look for an explanation. He didn't need to know more. The understanding between them had already been established, and that was enough. Ryan listened without interruption, his focus on Maya's words not out of obligation, but out of genuine attention. He wasn't a man given to small talk or idle chatter, but he found himself interested in what she had to say. She wasn't asking for anything, but she was offering something in return, a glimpse into a part of her life that wasn't always visible. Ryan found it rare in his experience for people to open up without needing something in return. Maya was sharing a piece of herself in the most understated way, and he appreciated that. There was something about her composure that fascinated Ryan. Maya didn't seem to want his sympathy, nor was she asking for validation. She wasn't trying to be a victim, nor was she hiding behind the mask of perfection. She was simply existing in this space, allowing the reality of her day-to-day to sit unspoken between them. It was refreshing in a way, to be around someone who wasn't trying to prove anything, someone who understood that people's stories weren't always made visible by the obvious. Maya's mind drifted for a moment, and she found herself considering the way Ryan had responded. Most people would have either ignored her or gone out of their way to make her feel like a special case. But Ryan hadn't done either. He had simply treated her like a human being, a person in need of a seat, nothing more. In a world that often made her feel less than, his quiet acknowledgement was a rarity, and it stuck with her in a way she couldn't quite explain. As the train continued its journey, Maya felt a shift within herself. The quiet conversation, the lack of forced politeness, had put her at ease in a way she hadn't expected. She hadn't realized how much weight she had been carrying, how much she had needed something as simple as a normal interaction. She didn't need sympathy, she didn't need pity, she just needed to be seen, without judgment, without assumption. And in that moment, Ryan had done just that. The silence in the train car hung comfortably for a few moments before it was unexpectedly broken by Lucas. His voice, small yet clear, cut through the quiet, filled with genuine curiosity. "Is your arm heavy?" he asked, his words innocent, unburdened by any social filters. Maya stiffened for a brief second, her body tensing in surprise. She had braced herself for many things in public, the sideways glances, the awkward avoidance, but not this. A child's straightforward question, uncolored by preconceived notions, had a weight all its own. Maya's instinct was to recoil, to deflect the question with humor or a quick excuse. But before she could respond, Ryan intervened gently. He turned his body slightly to face his son, offering a quiet but firm explanation. "People adapt to all kinds of challenges, Lucas, and it's better to ask questions respectfully than to stare." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as though this wasn't an exceptional moment, just a small lesson in the everyday reality of human interactions. Maya felt a rush of gratitude, not for the lesson in itself, but for the way Ryan handled it, without judgment, without a hint of discomfort. Lucas's eyes widened for a moment, absorbing his father's words with a nod. He seemed to accept the explanation without question, as if he understood that the act of asking was a bridge, not a barrier. Ryan's response felt like a reminder that it was okay to ask, to inquire openly and with curiosity, but to do so with respect. Maya's shoulders relaxed, the tension easing out of her body. She had prepared herself for the discomfort that often came when others didn't know how to react. But here, in this small corner of the world, things felt different. Maya's lips twitched upward into a soft smile, grateful for the understanding, the subtle shift that had happened so naturally. She turned her attention to Lucas, her voice calm as she responded, "It's lighter than it looks, actually." She paused for a beat, considering how to put it into words. "It reminds me of what I survived, and that gives it meaning." Her eyes met Ryan's for a brief moment, as if silently acknowledging the depth of her words, the vulnerability she had just shared. There was no need for a deeper explanation. She wasn't offering a sob story, just a piece of her truth. Lucas seemed satisfied with the answer, though his expression showed he was still processing it. "So, it's like a reminder of how strong you are?" he asked, his voice full of the kind of wonder only a child could possess. Maya blinked, surprised at the purity of his insight. Ryan gave a small chuckle, clearly proud of his son's perceptiveness. "Exactly," he said, offering a glance to Maya. It was such a simple exchange, but in that moment, something shifted in Maya's chest. A small but significant opening, a softening she hadn't realized she was craving. The train continued to rattle along the tracks, the city flashing by outside the windows, but the world inside the car had changed. The tension that had once hung in the air seemed to evaporate, replaced by a quiet ease. Maya realized that she hadn't had to explain her prosthetic arm to anyone in such a long time, at least not with this level of comfort. There was no pity in the way Lucas had asked, and no judgment in Ryan's response. It had been a moment of pure curiosity and understanding, the kind of interaction that didn't require her to be anything other than herself. Maya felt something inside her shift, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had expected discomfort, perhaps a need to justify herself, but instead she found acceptance in its most simple form. There was no need to hide, no need to over-explain. The honesty of a child, combined with the steady patience of a father, had brought her a clarity she hadn't anticipated. The moments in her life that once felt heavy had suddenly lightened, at least for this brief stretch of time. As the conversation moved on, Maya felt herself letting go of the small weight she had carried for so long. She smiled at Lucas, appreciating his innocence, and then at Ryan, grateful for the way he had handled the situation. The discomfort that usually came with questions like these had faded away, replaced by something deeper. Understanding, connection, and an unspoken recognition that sometimes all it took was a simple question to change the course of a moment. The train rolled forward with its usual rhythm, but something subtle had shifted inside the car. The sharp edges of silence dulled into something warmer, more human. A few passengers who had been staring at their phones now glanced up, not out of curiosity, but quiet reflection. Maya felt it, the change in energy, like a shared breath no one acknowledged. She spoke a little more freely now, her voice steady, explaining how she worked in urban planning, how long days often left her physically drained but mentally fulfilled. She didn't dramatize her challenges. She framed them as logistics, facts of movement and balance. Ryan listened the way few people did, without interrupting or rushing to relate everything back to himself. When he spoke, it was measured, thoughtful. He shared small pieces of his life as a single father, early mornings, packed lunches, the constant calculations of time and responsibility. He didn't portray it as heroic or tragic. It was simply the structure of his life. Maya noticed how naturally he spoke about it, without bitterness or pride, and it told her more about his character than any dramatic story could have. Lucas, sensing the comfort between them, leaned into the conversation with ease. He asked about Maya's job, curious about how cities were designed. She explained it simply, comparing streets to puzzles and people to moving pieces that needed space to exist without friction. His eyes lit up. Ryan watched the exchange quietly, struck by how effortlessly Maya engaged with his son, not talking down to him, not avoiding complexity. It reminded him how rarely adults spoke honestly to children without filtering everything through fear or discomfort. Around them, the train felt less like a temporary holding space and more like a shared moment. One passenger offered a faint smile. Another shifted to make more room in the aisle. Nothing overt, just small human adjustments. Maya realized how unusual it felt to be present without shrinking herself. She wasn't performing resilience or inviting sympathy. She was simply existing, speaking, being heard. The effort she usually carried in public spaces, the constant self-monitoring, eased in a way she hadn't expected. Ryan felt it too. He hadn't planned to say much that night. Exhaustion usually kept him guarded. But something about Maya's calm honesty made it easy to respond in kind. He talked about learning patience after his wife's death, about how raising Lucas alone had stripped life down to what actually mattered, not as a confession, but as context. Maya didn't interrupt or soften her gaze. She absorbed his words with respect, as if acknowledging that some truths didn't need commentary. As stations passed, Maya became more aware of her body, not with discomfort, but confidence. She adjusted her stance, preparing to stand soon, realizing she wasn't dreading it. The familiar ache was there, but quieter. When the announcement for her stop echoed through the car, she rose smoothly, steadier than she had been earlier. Ryan instinctively shifted to give her space, but she didn't need assistance. That realization alone felt like a small victory. She turned to them, slinging her bag over her shoulder with practiced ease. Her posture was different now, open, grounded. She thanked them again, but this time her voice carried something else. Not gratitude alone, but recognition. Ryan nodded, offering a simple smile. Lucas waved, unself-conscious and sincere. Maya returned it, feeling unexpectedly lighter as the doors slid open. As she stepped onto the platform, the train doors closing behind her, Maya caught her reflection in the glass. She looked the same, but something internal had shifted. The ride hadn't changed her life. It hadn't erased pain or rewritten history, but it had altered the tone of her day, maybe more. Sometimes she realized it wasn't the favor itself that mattered. It was the way being seen without judgment could quietly realign everything. Maya paused on the platform just long enough to turn back and meet Ryan's eyes through the closing doors. She lifted her hand in a small, sincere gesture that carried more meaning than words. It wasn't gratitude for the seat itself, but for the way it had been offered, without hesitation, without spectacle. As the train pulled away, she felt a quiet steadiness settle in her chest. The city noise rushed back in, but something inside her had softened. For the rest of the evening, she moved through crowds with less tension, reminded that dignity didn't have to be defended when it was simply respected. Inside the train, Ryan exhaled, without realizing he had been holding his breath. He looked down at Lucas, who was still watching the platform with thoughtful eyes. There was no dramatic conversation, no speech about values. Ryan understood that nothing more needed to be said. His son had witnessed something subtle and real, that strength could be calm, and generosity didn't require sacrifice to be loud. Ryan felt a quiet pride, not in himself, but in the kind of understanding Lucas was slowly absorbing through ordinary moments. Lucas broke the silence first, not with a question, but an observation. He said the woman seemed brave. Ryan nodded, agreeing, but added that bravery often looked like showing up, asking, and trusting people to respond. Lucas considered this seriously, leaning against his father as the train swayed. The lesson settled in him naturally, without rules or warnings attached. It wasn't about helping someone because they were different. It was about noticing when help could be offered and choosing to offer it. For Maya, the encounter lingered long after she reached home. While preparing dinner, she caught herself replaying the moment. Not the prosthetic, not the stares, but the absence of discomfort. The ease of being spoken to directly. The way the child had looked at her with curiosity, not fear. It reminded her that independence didn't mean refusing connection. Sometimes accepting a small kindness was its own form of strength, one she didn't need to apologize for. By the end of the night, all three carried something forward. Ryan carried reassurance that he was raising his son with quiet integrity. Lucas carried an unspoken understanding of empathy shaped by action, not instruction. And Maya carried a renewed trust in ordinary people, in brief intersections that asked nothing and offered everything. None of them would call it a life-changing moment, yet each knew, in their own way, that something essential had stayed with them, steady, human, and quietly transformative.